开普敦大学的Jochen Petersen 教授。那我们知道 Petersen 教授啊，他不是一位出色的学者，在这个领域。此外，他从2013年开始就兼任了这个我们应该是这个矿物加工与提取领域非常重要的一个学术，这个 Hydrometallurgy 目前是接杀一区这个营养因子3.3的这个期刊的主编。那个Jochen Petersen 教授呢，在我们的这个写作啊，以及就是在这个投稿整个过程中啊，他应该是具有这个非常独到的见解和非常丰富的经验。所以我们今天非常荣幸，这个邀请到Jochen Petersen 教授给我们大家介绍一下，就是怎么样对吧 ？How to prepare how to prepare 对吧？这个或者 supplement paper， 我们怎么样来这个在论文的这个撰写与投稿过程中有哪些问题需要注意？那么这个Petersen教授他当时就是说啊，这个在这个汇报过程中，因为他不是等同于这个学术报告，就是说的，他希望能够跟大家采用这种互动方式、交流的方式来就是了解大家每个人的这种个性化的问题。所以我希望就是咱们大家如果是来听这个报告的呢，都还是很希望在我们的这个论文写作是吧，尤其是可能跟 Hydrometallurgy 这些相关的这些论文的写作啊、投稿这些遇到的一些问题，我想就是大家能够更踊跃的提出来自己的问题，然后跟Petersen教授多进行一个沟通和交流，好吧？行 ，So let's welcome the presentation of Jochen Petersen.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So welcome back. So what I'm going to try and go through this afternoon, this is a presentation that's been prepared by Elsevier, who are the publishers of journals like Minerals Engineering and Hydrometallurgy. So it is not specific designed to how to write papers for hydrometallurgy or for minerals engineering, but for scientific journals in general. I feel in this kind of talk, please, if you have questions, ask them anytime during my presentation, so you don't have to wait till I've finished with the presentation, but rather ask the questions in between, because it's quite a long presentation and some questions may arise as we go along. So please feel free to interact, and I'll try and answer the questions as well as I can. The idea here is really of this presentation to give you some pointers how to prepare manuscript for publication, have a good chance of being accepted in a relatively quick time and published in the relevant journal. So to start off with, just giving a bit of a broad introduction into the publishing industry of scholarly articles in the first place, and a little bit about Elsevier as the publisher. And the publisher has a number of roles to play in terms of disseminating scientific information to the academic and broader public. So there is a concept of obviously trying to disseminate, inform people about scientific research anywhere in the world for use anywhere else in the world. So there's an understanding that underlies this, that scientific knowledge is universal, and it is for the benefit of humankind, for everyone to use and understand, and not to keep secret from one another. What is published in scientific literature is aimed in order to be available for everyone to know, and in the context also preserve knowledge. To say, well, what someone might disseminate today might not be necessarily of any particular relevance today, but 20, 30, 50 years down the line, suddenly people rediscover this work and build on it at a later stage. So it is also the whole idea to be archival, to be storing knowledge that's being generated. Someone did his PhD, or her PhD, at some stage on a particular topic, which may not be of particular relevance at the current time, but at a later stage. And so it needs to be available, needs to be not get lost, but you need to be able to find it again through studying old journal articles. Which, when I come back to this later, actually reminds me also, when you prepare your research, do look what's being published, and sometimes it's important that you also look at older publications. So sometimes stuff has been investigated 20, 30, 50 years ago, and then almost forgotten about. So don't think only by looking at publications in the last 10 years that you will necessarily cover the entire, all that there's to know about your research field. It may well be the case that you need to look back a lot later. And the ultimate other role for the publisher is also to now maintain this for use by someone else. So it's whether it's just academic use or ultimately for industry to exploit technology development, innovations in order to bring them out into practice, so that somebody needs to be able to go back to the published literature in order to base their developments on that. Okay, so now a little bit of advertising why I published with Elsevier. It's one of the top scientific publishing houses. So you can kind of check in terms of the global, these figures are from 20, I think, but in terms of global impact of all scientific research articles published in the world, you see that actually Elsevier is amongst the largest, the second largest publisher overall, but when it says here learned societies, that means that is not one single publisher, but a whole grouping of, like the American Chemical Society or so, who publish their own scientific publications. So in actual fact, as a single most publishing house, Elsevier is by far followed by Springer and Heinrich Wiley and Taylor and Francis. I don't know, you would fall somewhere between the chemical engineering and the material science and engineering disciplines. That is where Elsevier is by far the strongest publisher in the scientific literature. So everyone asked always about impact factors and journal metrics. I always say please be a little cautious. They are not the absolute measures of the quality of a journal. The point is citation factors or journal impact factors that you see here again. Those are somewhat older figures. They have now been updated. Is that obviously some some journals have very high impact factors, but that doesn't mean that they're super good journals. They just mean that that articles get cited very frequently, quite often because they cover very topics so to speak, very sexy topics that gain a lot of interest, so people cite a lot of the articles because it is very much of current interest. That doesn't mean that if your journal is somewhere down here, hydrometallurgy is not even on that list, I admit. But that doesn't mean that the articles that are published in hydrometallurgy are of lesser relevance to the discipline. It's just that the discipline as a whole has a smaller amount of citations, has a smaller amount of other people that publish each other. In the engineering journal, if you look quite carefully, there isn't really any of the engineering journal in the top-ranking journals, and the reason for that is because the application of engineering knowledge is often in industry, in industrial practice, in industrial application, and they don't cite because they come up with a technology, and then they don't go and now publish the application by themselves, but they're still used to work, so the work is still relevant, but because they don't write other articles that publish in other journals and therefore use citations, the citation indices of these of journals might be significantly lower. That doesn't mean that the impact of the article is as insignificant, or that what is published there is of low quality. So let me please caution you not to think when you want to publish an article, the idea really behind scientific publication is to publish knowledge, drive forward understanding of processes, not just for getting as high an impact factor as possible. Because even if you publish in a journal with a high impact factor, doesn't mean that anybody will cite your article. And so if the journal has a high impact factor, it doesn't necessarily automatically mean your article will. So please bear that in mind. So the publishing cycle, that leads us then a little bit more towards where we fit in as the editor of the journal, is with the idea to say you solicit and manage submissions. So submissions is the article that you submit to a journal. Sometimes we actually invite them. So that's what solicit means here. We invite articles on particular topics or for special issues, or people actually do submit them. And then articles come in. The engine behind scientific publishing is peer review, which means that your article will be read by some experts in the field, and who will then offer comment on the article and say, this is good work, this needs improvement, or this is really not suitable for publication. And so that process is through the publishing framework, through the that's my as editor of a journal to manage that process. And once the article is finally accepted, then the publishing house Elsevier will take it over. So once an article is accepted, it is actually, I will no longer have anything to do with it. Then Elsevier will actually now prepare the article into the format, will typeset it and format it into the format that in which it will get published, and then into production. In the old days, production meant printing on paper, putting the whole printing process, preparing off print. Nowadays, I think the paper production was, for most scientific journals, has become very, very small, only for some libraries that still keep paper copies, but the majority of production is now online production in order to make those articles available online, and then they finally get published and distributed. Okay, so there are some aspects to keep in mind here. The process of submission. Sorry, to start off with, you have that about there's about 14,000 editors. It's probably that even more these days of these different journal titles. And when the article is submitted, they get either considered for further peer review or rejected straight away. For various, the rejection is what I will talk about rejection a lot more a bit later. But the process is really to screen out what level of articles will actually be then considered further, or whether they've been submitted to the wrong journal, whether they are not at a standard that warrants publication in an international journal, and so forth. When the peer review starts, there is in the order of 700,000, and again, those are 2015 figures, so there are probably more these days, people who are engaged in the review process, and then ultimately we end up with something like 400,000 articles that are published. And I can only talk about hydrometallurgy has a very, very small fraction, and we publish about 300 articles per year. So this is 400,000 articles in total in Elsevier journals every year published. And then articles that are available online in one form or another is as many as 14 million that have been published over the years. And then obviously they are available online, and the publications is now no longer just measured in terms of citations, but also in terms of the downloads that articles receive from internet articles. That's something that you can count. Doesn't necessarily mean that people directly use this research, but when I said earlier, for example, industry or engineering companies might use knowledge that's being generated by universities but not cited, they will still download this information. And so counting downloads is, particularly in the engineering world, a better measure of the quality of your article or of the impact of your article than the citations are. So one has to be quite conscious of that metric as well. Okay, so then the main part of the presentation is now about preparing the manuscript, and that there's a number of things to consider before you get started, to kind of think about what is it actually that you're trying to convey, to bring across in the article. So you need to think about what makes a strong manuscript. What is something that will be considered with interest reviewers and will then get published speedily? And there's a couple of key points to memorize here. So the one thing is you need to send a very clear, useful, and ideally message. And that has to do a lot with novelty. And that's some aspect that I need to emphasize, cannot emphasize enough for publishing an article in a journal, be that Hydrometallurgy or any other article. International journals, you're really looking for novelty. So to say, to just say, okay, we apply bioleaching to a different ore, but we use exactly the same organisms, we use exactly the same techniques as we used with the last ore. That is not particularly novel, that's not particularly exciting. And so you need to look for the aspects that are really where you gain new insights, new knowledge, new science that you can derive from your work, or where it's not necessarily complete novelty, where there's a significant contribution to science, where your work helps to understand processes, phenomena, reactions, ideas better than previously understood. So before you even start writing your article, think, what is the message that this article will bring across? What is new and different and interesting and exciting that my article will bring across? And then you need to kind of realize, and this is what the bulk of my presentation today will be about, is that the article needs to be presented in a logical and well-constructed manner, to be easy to follow, to be easy to read, and so that the reader will quickly and easily understand what the article is all about. And that is not just to say exactly the words that you're writing, but how you construct the article, how you can put the different sections together, how you present your data. So all thinking a little bit, when you prepare a manuscript, you need to disconnect yourself from the work a little bit. You as the person who's done the experiments or who's done the research, and into the role of the reader of the article to say, well, just imagine I didn't know much about this work and I want to go now and tap on this. Does my article actually convey a clear message? Okay, so what types of manuscripts do you normally get published? So there are a couple of distinctions to be made. There's full articles, so those need to be the kind of substantial, complete and comprehensive pieces of research. And that is quite difficult to distinguish sometimes from letter or short communications. Because a full article, a short communication is a short article about a particular interesting or short research finding, and I'll elaborate on this in a moment. Whereas a full research article needs to give a proper introduction and position the work in a broader research context, contain a significant amount of research, of experimental data or analyses. Those articles are normally about 20 manuscript pages. So like before they get published, not as a published article, because they get a lot more compressed, but when you type a Word document, then it would be about 20 pages. That makes up a full article, and then 10 pages would be more a short communication. This is a sort of rough distinction. Then there's the so-called review papers or current opinions. Review papers is a complicated category. So it's not something that one should take lightly. Review papers, obviously, the idea is that you review the existing knowledge in a particular field quite systematically. So normally it involves reading a very large number of references and citations and analyzing the body of work that exists in the existing literature. And the emphasis has to be here on analyzing. And so it's not just a kind of table of contents of what others have published, but it needs to really go and synthesize new information out of what others have published. And that is the hard part in a review of the paper. And I'll come back to that in a bit more detail later. Then the so-called micro article, that this is a feature that Elsevier offers. I'll be honest with you, I haven't got much experience with this, but it's particularly useful for small pieces of software that might be developed, methods, chemical or analytical methods that you want to communicate that don't require necessarily a full article to describe, or the so-called data in brief, which is really just providing some degree of data without going into a more fundamental analysis. But data, sort of like a series of measurements, for example, thermodynamics measurements or the like that you want to communicate. In Hydrometallurgy, the journal that I represent, we don't really do articles of this nature, but the other three categories are generally considered. Okay. Okay, so going a little bit more detail, as I already said, the original research article standard for dissemination of completed research finding. Yes, it's typically 8 to 10 pages. That is actually for Untitled short. That refers to just bulk text. So I should distinguish between text with all the figures and figures. So 8 to 10 pages. It's commonly a bit more of the bulk text, and then figures 5. That can be easily a bit more, but it shouldn't be too many. And the number of references. These are just guidelines, so please don't be feeling like compelled to say, oh, my article has 12 pages, so therefore there's something wrong with it. That is not really that significant. It's more a minimum standard. And the original research article are really, you need to see that as a good way to build your scientific career. So you should try and if you pursue a scientific career, really to produce a number of articles, and that depends obviously what discipline you're in. I would say particularly in the engineering disciplines, you're probably good if you start off with writing 2 or 3 articles a year that you get published in scientific journals. And then so over the years you build up a nice portfolio of research papers. Short communications. The intention here is really quick and early communications of significant original advances. And that is what one needs to distinguish. They're not meant to be lesser papers. They're not meant to be sort of papers that and they don't quite make it to be a full research article, so we make it a short communication. And the idea really is to say, well, actually what we do is the idea of this short communication is to present research findings that are particularly significant, that are particularly interesting, but for which you still need to do further study to substantiate them. So it's a quick and early communication. That's the whole idea, to publish something that's particularly of interest before somebody else publishes it. It's particularly relevant, for example, in the medical sciences or so, where bringing something new advances out quickly is quite important. So a lot of these articles are just short communications. They're only like 2 or 3 pages long, and really just focus on some core interesting relevance, but the more scientific detail of these papers will follow at a later stage. Review articles, so they are longer. Here the key word is critical synthesis of specific research topic. And the importance, I cannot stress enough, because I do get quite regularly review articles which are nothing but a combination of short summaries from papers. So paper A says this, and paper B says that, and paper C says that. And so it's just a list of who did what. That is not a review. That is just a summary. That's a list of a summary, which is part of a review, but what is critical in synthesis is meaning that you put in together findings from different papers, you pull them together to try and derive new insights, or at least summarizing insights that none of the individual articles can provide you with. So that is more challenging. And they become longer articles. They have larger number of references. 80 is actually quite on the small side. So I just recently published a review article that has 250 references. So it depends, of course, on the field and how relevant it is. It is, of course, when for a lot of PhD students, they start off with a literature review in their particular topic. But that doesn't automatically mean, because you're not doing a literature review for your PhD, that will automatically make for a good review article. So it needs to be a topic, a sufficiently specific topic, And obviously there needs to not be a review paper already in existence, or there needs to be significant developments in the field since the last review article. So how often does it actually get solicited by journal editors? So asking experts in the field, would you mind writing an article that creates a little bit of a summary and overview of that particular research field? But it's not compulsory, so you can also submit it to a journal, but you must expect that it gets viewed quite critically. So we normally quite cautious with review articles, whether they really contribute something novel in themselves by reviewing other work. So then another word on citations. Different types of articles have different span of when they are getting cited. So technical notes might get cited quickly after they've been published within 2 years, but then they very quickly away because the novelty of the short communication will actually wear off and it will become standard knowledge. So people will no longer cite it. Normal standard research article have a slightly longer lifespan, so they will start to peak after 3 to 4 years in terms of being cited, but they will still continue to be cited for 10, 20 years after they've been published. And so they have a longer lifespan. Obviously with reviews, they tend to be cited for a long time and have a much higher rate of citations. And that is of course the reason why people want to publish review articles, because they generally do generate a lot of citations. And if you look for many well-known researchers, their best cited articles are actually review articles. But at the same time, you have to be cautious not to think, as a scientist who's starting out, that writing a review article is the only way to actually get a high citation rate. Because you really need to have a substantial understanding of the research field, and that is not something that you can quickly get just by reading a couple of articles. Okay, next big step in writing or putting together an article is actually that you choose the right journal to begin with. So there is in Elsevier a tool that's called Journal Finder that basically uses where you enter your paper title, the abstract, and maybe some keywords, and that sort of helps you suggest journals that are published by Elsevier which might be the best suitable match for your article. Be cautious though, because it doesn't automatically mean it will always find the right match for you, because there are certain types of articles for which there is no suitable journal in the Elsevier table. You need to go to a different publisher. That's the one thing. I think Journal Finder is actually quite good. It only uses Elsevier journals. So it's a bit sort of like incestuous, because sometimes very good journals are published by other publishing houses, and that's where you should aim for publishing. The other thing is, even if your Journal Finder tool suggests to you you should publish, you submit your article to Hydrometallurgy, first go and check what type of articles are actually published in Hydrometallurgy, and does your article really fit in with the journal? And that's quite surprises me, because I would say of all the articles I get, in the order of 10% of articles are submitted to the wrong journal. They're not actually suited for Hydrometallurgy. And it always keeps surprising me why people submit articles to Hydrometallurgy. If you just took a few articles out of Hydrometallurgy, you would immediately know that that's not the right journal for the kind of articles. That's not always true. There are, of course, also articles which sort of fit into Hydrometallurgy, but there are better journals for that particular topic. one thing is always, and I think I'll come back to this later, when you look at your references. If you cite articles, if you check which journals the articles that you're citing have been published in. Because if none of these articles that you're citing have been published in hydrometallurgy, chances are that your article will also not fit into hydrometallurgy. But that's just, again, that's just a guide. So also please do not misunderstand that to mean that in order to be published in hydrometallurgy, you have to cite articles that have already been published in hydrometallurgy. That's really not what I'm trying to say here. It's more as to say it's generally a good indication. And if your article, if you cite more articles from the journal, they want to consider submitting that article there first. So my publisher would probably not want to hear that, but I tend to say, you know, Elsevier is not the only publisher, it's not the only game in town. So you can, you should also look at other journals that publish in your given field. Okay, so just I set this. Okay, then you can further also consult with the journal homepage. So all Elsevier journals have an actual fact a homepage which gives detailed information about what the journal covers, what it maybe not doesn't cover, what the most cited articles, what they cover. So there's a lot of information you can get from looking at that particular journal site and see, does my article fit into that framework. Yeah, so journal metrics, that. Most downloaded articles is particularly in this day and age, a very useful indicator of also what is of current interest in the journal. And as I said earlier, downloaded particularly journals that are more focused on engineering context, it's a better indicator than citation index. The citation index, of course, that is always there, given there as a metric. For scientific journals, the pure sciences, that's a strong indicator. For journals more in the engineering field, it's not a strong indicator. And looking at the number of downloads is a better indicator. And it also gives you information, of course, then on the most cited articles, on special issues that have been recently published and so forth. Okay, so that is all now before we start writing the article, is these kind of steps. So what do I need which steps I need to take is to determine, decide, choose, and check. So this is like check what is in my article, decide on a focus on what type of article, choose the suitable journal, and then also double check that the journal that you picked is actually suitable for your article. And you should do that before you start writing the article. It's useful to write your article with the journal in mind that you want to publish it in. And then get sub-articles from that journal and see how they've done it. Particularly when you're writing, different journals have different styles. And I've learned that just the other day when I published an article in a journal that I've never published it before. And I prevented the way I would submit an article to hydrometallurgy or minerals engineering or any of those journals. And I suddenly got sort of critiqued by the editor of the journal to say, you know, this article doesn't fit the format that we want to publish it in. And so we don't have. So again, it's useful to actually carefully check the way the article that are published in that journal are laid out, constructed, and then use that information for preparing your own manuscript. Okay. Up front, why is language important? So I know the critical thing for you is English is not your first language, but all the international journals are published in English. And that is the lingua franca of international publishing. And so it's quite critical that you communicate in that lingua. You know, if you want your research find to be published, to be disseminated, you need to speak the language in which the scientific community speaks. And so it is quite critical that you prepare your articles in good language, in good English. So if you don't, it can delay, or in some cases even block publications of your work. And I had a number of cases where I had to turn articles down from not just from various countries where English isn't the first language, because they were so badly written, the English was so badly written that nobody could really understand what the article was about. And that's not the point. You know, you want to communicate, and it could be sometimes, and that's the sad thing here, like you have the statement is saying, it's quite impressive to think that we spend millions in grants for people to perform experiments, produce new knowledge, and then end up writing that knowledge in badly written text, and then you need to actually spend time to figure out what these people did in their research, and that defeats the purpose. The clearer you can bring your message across, the more to the benefit of the scientific community at large. So it needs to be clear scientific communication is a very critical aspect. Now, what you need to understand is editors or publishers do not correct. You might be lucky that you have a reviewer of your article who will take the pain of correcting your English. But quite often, they might actually do the exact opposite. They say, this article is not comprehensible, I refuse to review this article. And that's really not a situation that you want. If it's minor grammar mistakes, yes, generally the editor will sort of point them out to you and polish them. But if the overall style of writing, the overall language is not clear, then it is not going to be the editor's or the publisher's responsibility to correct the English. But don't despair. There is this facility at the Elsevier web shop. They actually facilitate English language editing. So you will get, the article will then be sent, obviously it's at a fee, but the article will be sent to people who are qualified, first of all, for whom English is the first language and who are qualified in editing good English, and they will then polish the article for you so that you can submit them to a journal with a much higher chance of success or acceptance for publication. There's a bit of a trade-off, because you sometimes I quite often see where people do that then when the article is about to be accepted, and then we say, okay, the article, scientific article is good enough, but you still need to edit the language, and then people submit it to a professional editing service and have it fixed up. But that's take risk, because your article might not get accepted even for in context, because the language